Hey everybody, Kurt Martin, markmoney.com. Today we're going to talk about how much you should have saved by the time you're 30 years old. Now we'll also look at all ages really, everything from 18 all the way to 67. And we'll do that by investigating how your income might impact the amount of wealth you've accumulated. And then we'll look at what the average American defines as wealthy and how much you should have to reach that goal. Okay, before we look in the numbers, let's talk about what it is we're saving for exactly. Because when you ask the question, how much you should have saved by 30, the assumption is there's a goal, but we haven't really defined it. Now for this video, we're talking about financial independence, which basically means a point in your life where you no longer require on a job or running a business or a traditional sort of work to produce an income and provide for yourself. So you're completely independent of needing income from those sources. Now, when you reach that point in your life is dependent on a lot of factors. You may want to retire early, or maybe you want to and you aren't able to, whatever it is. Really, that part's up to you, but today we're gonna kind of assume that you're gonna retire somewhere around your mid-60s. All right, second, when we talk about what you're saving, we're not just talking about savings in the bank. And we're not just talking about IRAs and 401ks and things like that. We're not. When we talk about how much you have saved, we mean your overall net worth with a couple of caveats. First, we're not talking about your home, mainly because you need to live in it. It's hard to liquidate a house. If you have one, you're probably not going to sell it when you get older just so you can retire because you need some place to live, right? So first off, we're leaving the house. We're also not talking about depreciating assets like cars or boats because kind of pinning down the value of those things is difficult. It's a moving target because the value is always decreasing on those items, and you don't really want to depend on that in terms of, providing income or liquidating to give you money because they're also not really reliable on how quickly you can sell them. So we're not including anything like that. So to summarize, we're really talking about things like cash you have saved, any prepaid expenses like maybe college funding through a 529 or something like that. And then finally, invested assets like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, your retirement accounts, things like that. Things that are easy to liquidate. All right, the first method we want to talk about is Fidelity's multipliers of income. Now this method is incredibly simple. Just take the age over here in the table to my left, figure out what multiplier times your income you would use to evaluate your net worth, and voila, you have your answers. So for a 40-year-old male making $60,000 a year, he should have a net worth of $180,000. I really like Fidelity. They're a great company, but I'm not sure I really love this table. If you look at the 67-year-old at the bottom, they show a 10 times multiplier for net worth. I just don't think that's enough. Now maybe Fidelity was assuming there would be some Social Security income or pension income or something of the like, and I guess that's okay if you got enough of that. But the traditionally accepted 4% rule says that you should have 25 times your income by the time you retire. Now granted, if you're 67, making it to 97 isn't a given, but still 10x falls way short of that 25x multiplier. So I've taken Fidelity's table and I've revised it a bit. And you'll notice at age 67, you have the 25x of income. You'll also notice that as you age, the multiplier kind of ramps up exponentially, and that's because investments do. I'm making the assumption that to reach your retirement goals or your financial independence goals, you're actually investing in assets that appreciate in value, like equities, bonds, things like that. Now you're also likely to hit your highest income and earning years in your 40s and 50s, which is also going to speed that up a bit. All right, the second method we're going to talk about is the Millionaire Next Door method. Now, if you've never heard of it, The Millionaire Next Door was a book written by Thomas Stanley and William Danko back in 1996. They did a ton of research on millionaires and identified 7 common characteristics that millionaires shared. Anyhow, in the book, Danko and Stanley, they have identified 3 different types of savers. They call them under accumulators of wealth, average accumulators of wealth, and prodigious accumulators of wealth. And they identify them using this formula. Basically, the formula is to determine an average accumulator of wealth. You take 10% and you multiply it by your age and your annual income. So back to our 40-year-old earlier that was making $60,000 a year. If you multiply 10% times 40 times 60,000, he would need $240,000 to be an average accumulator of wealth. Now they went on to define an under accumulator of wealth as anyone who is kind of hitting below this standard or mark, and a prodigious accumulator of wealth was anybody that was over the mark. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I like this formula a lot better. By factoring in age, it gives you a much more accurate or realistic picture of what someone could or should have in terms of saving and net worth. But it's not perfect. Let's go back to our 40-year-old making $60,000 a year. Let's assume that he's 23 now. If you take 10%, multiply it times 23 times $60,000 a year, he would need $138,000 in order to be considered an average accumulator of wealth. Now, I looked it up. A 23-year-old with $138,000 net worth would be in the 95th percentile in America. That's hardly what I would consider average. Now, to account for this bias against young people, the formula was altered a bit by the Money Guy Show. It's a great podcast and show. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. Go check it out. But anyway, they took the formula and made it more accommodating for young people. All right, under their formula, you take your age times your annual income and you divide it by the number of years until you turn 40 plus 10. So under this formula, our 23-year-old friend would only need $51,111 to be considered an average accumulator of wealth. That's still a tall order for a 23-year-old, but it's more realistic, and it becomes even more so as you approach 40. Now under this formula, once you reach 40, you go back to the standard formula from the Millionaire Next Door that we talked about earlier, and you use it from that age on up. Hey, if you haven't already, please click the like and subscribe buttons below. It helps get the word out about our channel. It helps us teach other people about finance. So maybe you're like me and you calculated what you should have based on these formulas, and then you wondered, I wonder what the average American has, or I wonder what the average American would look like in relation to these. Well, we got you covered. We built a table based off median income in the United States of $44,225 based in 2023. And the results for under accumulators, average accumulators, and prodigious accumulators of wealth are in the table on your screen. Now for this table, we identified average accumulators of wealth first using the formulas we've already talked about. We assumed under accumulators of wealth would have about half of that, and prodigious accumulators of wealth would have double that amount. Now when I first ran these numbers, I was a bit surprised to see that a prodigious accumulator of wealth at age 65, using that median income, would only have $575,000 saved. Using the 4% rule we talked about earlier, that's about a $23,000 withdrawal in the first year of retirement, which is hardly what I would consider the highlight. Now I'm not pointing this out to make fun of people who make median income or less, but what I do hope it does is help you to see clearly the importance of saving. You can't just make assumptions that one day everything's going to be okay, and you can never replace time. The most critical component in investing and growing wealth is time. So if you're not saving, if you're doing these formulas and you see that you're behind, there's no better time than now to start saving. Okay, with all that said, my next thought was, well, how much would I need to save to be wealthy? And what is wealthy anyway? Well, in 2022, Charles Schwab set out to define what wealthy was based on net worth. And they surveyed a lot of people, and the answer they came up with was $2.2 million. Now, it wasn't scientific, it was a poll, but that's generally what people felt like was considered wealthy. So $2.2 million. How much would you need to have saved at each age to reach $2.2 million by the time you're 65? Well, we built a table for that too. We got some of those numbers listed next to us in the table. Now we made an assumption rate of return of 8% when we built this table. We think that's pretty conservative. The S&P 500 has returned 10.5% or more since its inception, so 8% we feel like is a pretty conservative number. All right, well there you go, a few ways to accumulate how much you should have saved by each age. This was a lot of fun, but none of these methods should be considered highly accurate or scientific. The truth is, to really know how much you need to be financially independent or how much you need to retire is highly dependent on how much you spend, not your income. And we have tons of posts about that and other topics on martinmoney.com. We also have full tables that are much longer than the ones we're able to put in the video on our website. As always, thank you so much for watching our videos. Be sure to check us out on the social channels below and check out our website, martinmoney.com. Take care.